This is part of a series of meetings that we've been holding. This evening's meeting is entitled Brexit, Are You Sure? Let's have a look at the challenges, the consequences, and also the opportunities. And indeed, as I have done with other debates of this kind, invited the local MP, people who want to speak up on behalf of Brexit. As I started advertising this and indeed the other events, I've been advised how wrong I am by a whole set of keyboard warriors that one has the pleasure of meeting on social media, and so I invited them the opportunity to sit alongside us and to give us the benefit of their wisdom this evening, and sadly they have declined my kind opportunity, each one of them, to do so. So we are where we are, but I am extremely grateful, however, that this evening we have two fantastic expert speakers this evening. Sarah Holmes, who is a solicitor who I think is well known to many of you, and who is been advising businesses on Brexit, and will say a great deal more about the negotiations she's been involved in, and indeed in London this very day, hearing from the government department responsible for exiting the European Union, with no doubt some very interesting and up-to-date messages as to what the withdrawal agreement means. And secondly, Jason Hunter, who's very kindly come down to see us again, I should say, because he was down a couple of weeks ago, come down to see us, and I think is well known to many of you, those who follow the intelligence side of the debate. He and his colleagues, the Three Blokes in a Pub, and a series of video blogs on YouTube on behalf of that group, and he'll be telling you a great deal more as we go through. So this evening we're just going to have some short presentations for 20 to 30 minutes, if that's all right, from the two of them, and then an opportunity for a Q&A. I've invited Cornwall for Europe to say a few words at the end, as they are sponsoring and supporting this evening's event, as well as the fact that they have some important announcements to make this evening. I had also invited representatives from the fishing industry, the Cornish Fish Producers Organisation. I mean, in the end, they felt so and understandably so, in my view, so uncertain about what the withdrawal agreement was meaning for the fishing industry at this time, that they still needed time to, if you like, see and to hear more from the government departments to clarify exactly what it'll mean for the industry. So I'm hoping that we'll have an opportunity at a future event to hear from them, because I think there are specific sectors in this area that I believe whose voices need to be heard in this debate and as we go forward. Okay, so I think I've described how we're going to manage this evening. We're going to give you, as I say, an opportunity a little bit later on to ask questions about the issues. That is, Jason and I went to Penwith College earlier today and met a large group of students who, I have to say, were extremely interested, asked questions, were entirely on the button, and completely engaged in the issues. Very impressive group of students. So we had there, I think some have even endured it so much and perhaps even enjoyed it that they've come again this evening. So thank you for coming. And what worries me, and a reflection which I came away with, having met them, their interest, their concern about what is happening, what has been done, is that we were talking to people who perhaps only in the last few months have become old enough themselves to vote, but who don't have a voice. The most momentous, if you like, political decision that is going to be taken in their lives was taken just before they were entitled to vote, and yet they have no voice. And there's no reason, quite frankly, that particular cohort of young people whose lives are going to be so significantly affected should be the ones who should be saying right now, hang on a minute, before you do this on such a marginal vote in such dodgy circumstances, isn't it time that our voices were heard before we go jumping over this cliff? And that's what I think. And it's on their behalf that I think we should all be fighting and campaigning to ensure that this country makes the right decision for their future. So thank you very much for coming. Now, Sarah, over to you. Sarah's going to show us some overhead projector slides as well. So we're using every sophistication here this evening, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say, Sarah. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Andrew, for asking me to speak this evening. I work in a very evidence-based environment for the last nearly 30 years. I've been a practitioner of environmental law and planning law. Environmental law heavily EU-driven. Planning law is very much a UK sovereign competency with just a few strands of EU law in it. So I have the contrast of what the UK... Okay. Is that better? Okay. I didn't want to hear myself. I think that was... So I specialise in environmental law, which is very heavily dependent and drawn from the European Union. I also specialise in planning law, which is a UK sovereign power. We don't have very much EU influence in that because land use planning is for the member states individually to control. And as we approached the EU referendum, I was going to quite a lot of events that were focusing on environmental law impacts. We had people coming from the Commission to explain what would happen if there was a vote to leave in terms of the procedures. But it was really, as pace gathered very rapidly towards the end of the campaigns, and I realised quite how inaccurate and actually downright fraudulent, frankly. A lot of the campaigning was with the messages that were being given out, that I sort of put my head above the parapet for the first time ever in terms of a view on a largely political decision. So I've been working since the EU referendum. I didn't stay still on the 24th of June. I've been working with many clients as they prepare for the changes that Brexit can deliver, possibly, to their businesses. We've been trying to get certainty where we can. And this morning I was in London at the conference of the Chemicals Industry Association, where we had Dexu, the minister, Robin Walker was unable to come because there was some stuff going on back at the office, but he sent his director along, so we had some information from there, and I'll just finish up my bit just by giving you some of the headlines from that. But the first point I wanted to make really is that we hear a lot about taking back control of our laws, our money and our borders, but it wouldn't really matter if 100% of people in the United Kingdom had voted to leave the European Union, because the rules of trade, the laws that we are subject to or will be subject to in our relationships with other countries are already there. So there is a lot of certainty that we can have about what will happen as a consequence of leaving legal structures. The point of a customs union is to reduce some barriers to trade at the border. So therefore, if you leave a customs union, you raise barriers. The single market is the world's deepest, largest and wealthiest, freest market. There is no equivalent anywhere in the world. The 28 members of the European Union are the only countries in the world who have frictionless trade across their borders as a result of both the customs union and the single market. So I just wanted to explain to you why Theresa May has had such a struggle to come up with some form of deal that tries to respect her interpretation of the EU referendum result, whilst not completely savaging major parts of our economy, some of which face existential threats if we leave with a hard Brexit out of both the customs union and the single market onto WTO trade. So the first slide I have is the one that Michel Barnier produced to explain to the EU 27 what the border controls that needed to be arranged in Ireland would comprise. And these cover a little bit of the customs union. Customs is sort of tariffs and quota, how much of stuff you can import. The real meat of frictionless trade comes from the single market. And you will see, I won't go through all of the categories, but you can see there are 3 categories of measures that the single market delivers to avoid any friction across borders. And all of these will need to be raised as a consequence of the UK leaving the single market and the customs union. Some of these are quite complicated, particularly where you're dealing with agricultural products or fisheries products, where you would want to test the health of and the quality of produce and have to have arrangements for that. And the European Union, by law, provides that none of its member states can import foodstuffs, agricultural products, fisheries, other than from third countries, other than through border inspection posts, which are facilities with refrigerated warehouses, vets, fisheries inspectors, who are able to look at the pre-border paperwork that's been submitted in advance and then look at the produce to make sure that it meets the specifications. I work in, my office is in Plymouth. It overlooks Plymouth Ferry Port. Plymouth Ferry Port does not have the space to accommodate the infrastructure necessary to be a border inspection post. There was a report published just this week by the Inspector of Ports, the government's Inspector of Ports, and he said that actually none of the South Coast ports have enough staffing and infrastructure to cope with current flows of trade, let alone the extremely large increase in bureaucracy and inspections that would be necessitated as a result of a hard Brexit. And it's to overcome these issues that Theresa May has been trying to strike a balance in her negotiations with the EU, who have a greater interest possibly than us in terms of the flow of goods, because they export more goods to us than we export to them. And it's a bit strange talking about import and export because we're actually one market, but across the channel anyway. But where the UK really makes its money in that relationship is in the export of services to the EU, and I'm afraid those are not covered in the withdrawal agreements. So we do have some issues there. But these are the reasons why it is not possible to have a frictionless border anywhere unless you are inside both the customs union and the single market. Now, the Freight Transport Association and the Road Haulage Association have been working very hard in lobbying government to say, do you realise all of these barriers to trade that you will need to provide before we leave the European Union? It's all on the internet. So this is the Freight Transport Association's before and after chart. So the top row is exports to the EU, the current process, transaction, movement across the border, but that's just not a customs check, just a risk check sometimes, depending on the product, and then it's delivered. After Brexit, the rules of international trade, together with the rules of the single market, add an additional 9 stages to the export process for UK goods. This has the effect of building a wall around the United Kingdom for UK producers, whether they're farmers, fishermen, manufacturers. So the consequence of leaving the single market and the customs union is not to free a trade, it is the erection of very significant barriers to trade around the UK that all UK exporters will have to climb over. those who export to us will have a choice as to whether they wish to trade with the United Kingdom. But if we want to trade, we will have to climb over these barriers. And I asked my own MP, Cheryl Murray, last week at the Saltash Chamber of Commerce meeting, where I went along to speak to her because she will no longer answer my letters. And I produced this for her, and I said, you are pushing for a hard Brexit. You want us to leave the customs union and the single market. Why haven't you spent the past 2 years lobbying government to build all of the new infrastructure we need, to put in place all of the new bureaucracies? We've got several different bodies and chambers of commerce that will be necessary for each transaction just to get all of the paperwork through, because you've got export declarations, plus product certifications once you've got laboratory sign-off or health certificates, etc. There's a huge amount of work that's needed to put in place all of this bureaucracy. You know, why haven't the Cornish MPs who voted, or 5 or 6 of them voted for this, been lobbying, as the MP in Dover has, to provide all of this stuff? And she just passed this piece of paper back to me and said that nobody knew what was going to happen. We just have to wait for the deal. But if I'd like to send it to her, she would forward it to DEXU and ask them to comment. So part of my practice covers chemicals and waste, and I've been dealing with the Port of Rotterdam in the absence of guidance from our own government and departments on what processes I need to be building into my supply contracts, where we're engaging in circular economy, keeping materials out of waste disposal chains. And I just thought you would be interested, given the focus on jam in the run-up to the EU referendum, on the new processes that will need to be put in place before our marmalade can be either exported to the EU 27 or imported from them. Rotterdam, I have to say, are absolutely fantastic. They are so nice to deal with, so organised, and there is a lot of information on their own website if you're interested in finding out more about the customs procedures. But you can see here, this is definitely not frictionless trade. And this is one of the issues that Theresa May's obviously faced once she realised what her 3 red lines meant in practice. This is another Rotterdam slide. Most of these barriers have got nothing to do with the payment of tariffs or limits on how much quantity-wise you can send in goods overseas. So these are very substantial barriers which will have a very detrimental impact on UK exporters. I just wanted to touch on the balance of competencies, because the EU, the relationship between the UK and the EU has been horribly distorted. In between 2012 and 2014, I don't know if many of you remember David Cameron promising the Balance of Competencies review, which the government proudly said was the most extensive analysis of what EU membership meant ever undertaken by a member state. It took over 2 years, cost several millions of pounds, over 2,300 sources of evidence in 32 areas where the European Union, which is a legal entity, it's not a government, it just has the powers which the 28 member states have jointly given to it, where it has some competency in UK life. And these are the 32 areas that were focused on in the Balance of Competencies reviews. And the striking thing from that review, and there were people who were not great Euro enthusiasts. There were all sorts. There was industry, business groups, people who were concerned about migration and so on, who were able to give evidence. But the striking thing from the reviews was that there isn't a single area in which the reviews concluded that the UK would benefit from repatriating a competency from the European Union. These reports are really interesting if you want to read them. I have to confess, read every single one of them, but I have read quite a few, particularly that are relevant to my clients. So we are now in the process of repatriating competencies in 32 areas where our own evidence tells us that we will not benefit. Jason's going to talk more about trade, so I'm just going to leave this here. One point that I will make that Michel Barnier has been saying is that on the 29th of March this year, whether or not there is a withdrawal agreement, the UK will lose the right to trade under all of the EU negotiated agreements with other countries. And I've just put up here 2 of the slides that give an indication of that, and I'll leave it to Jason to talk about the rest of international trade. But when I asked actually the director from DEXU today how Liam Fox was getting on with trying to roll over some of these agreements, and she said to me that she knew that there was a big focus on this, because this is, of course, a lot of our trade with the rest of the world is undertaken under these agreements, even where they're not full-blown trade deals. They're facilitation arrangements, the United States, for example, and China. And then somebody came up to me afterwards and said that he'd been negotiating directly with the Department of Trade, and things were going really, really slowly and not very well at all. So we have a huge uncertainty, which Jason will cover in more detail. Just quickly want to mention foreign direct investment, because this seems to be an overlooked issue. The UK has an incredibly open economy. We've not had restrictions on who can own businesses in our country. As a result, we have had, certainly by 2016, we had around £1 trillion worth of money invested in the UK, mostly by overseas companies that didn't want to trade with the European Union, because by investing in it, they could engage in frictionless trade in the world's largest, wealthiest marketplace. So America, for example, the US Chamber of Commerce in the European Union's got a very good website on this. In 2016, US companies had nearly $600 billion invested in the UK, and US affiliates located in the UK employed nearly 1.4 million people. Most of that is located in the UK in order to be in the single market. A UK out of the single market means they've got all of those barriers to trade with the EU that they'd have if they were trying to run the business from the States. And shortly before the referendum, I went along to a Bank of England agent's talk to the Plymouth Manufacturers Group, where he was really concerned about the impact on the loss of foreign direct investment, because we have such a large current account deficit, and pointed out that if the UK loses foreign direct investment, we've got to try to replace it by selling our own assets to cover that balance of payments. But also the cost of borrowing, which is currently nearly 4.5 times our EU contribution, would go up. Even if it just went up 1%, it would be more than £16 billion a year extra in borrowing costs, just because the UK economy was not regarded as such a strong case for lending to. So the Governor of the Bank of England calls foreign direct investment the kindness of strangers. We have these people who are very kindly putting money into our economy and saving us money on our interest costs, but they won't keep it here if they're not benefiting from it. This is just a trade competitiveness. This is a really great global website on trade competitiveness, and you can jump on it and look at the trade performance of any country, where its strengths are, where its weaknesses are. And you won't be able to see this, and I need to take my glasses off, but it's basically pointing out that our biggest manufacturing exports are the motor sector, the chemical sector, the aerospace sector, and the pharmaceutical sectors, by a long margin, all four necessitate presence in the single market, because that is how they have been built. So I'm not sure what Liam Fox is looking to trade, but it's not, unfortunately, easy for our four biggest manufacturing sectors to benefit from that. I think he's looking to be more at services. Just a quick point to dispel this myth that we keep hearing about how protectionist the European Union is. Global Trade Alert looks daily, pretty much. It's the international website. It looks at what measures different countries are putting on in terms of protecting themselves. And you will see, this is from a 2.5 years or 3 years ago, so it would have changed a bit in the meantime. But the USA is by miles the most protectionist country. That's taking together all of the barriers. So the United Kingdom will be leaving the world's largest and most sophisticated frictionless trade area, and trying to strike trade deals with countries that are much bigger than us, much more protectionist, and will be demanding much more from us in terms of the price to give us access to their markets. And just a quick slide to look at the position of poor Cornwall in terms of the EU's agenda, which is a far more objective and far less political agenda. So the regional funding that Cornwall has benefited from is given to us not because we have MPs of a certain political party, but because when the objective criteria that the EU use, when they're looking at the different regions and inequalities are applied, we are within the top 10, or in fact number 2 on this particular measure. And you'll note the number of orange dots in the United Kingdom, which are the most deprived or the poorest areas in the European Union. That is a function of our domestic government's allocation of resources within our own country, and is not a feature or a responsibility of the European Union. So those were the slides I just wanted to run through with you. There were just a couple of points I wanted to make. The first is that the European Union is partly about the internal market. It's also about the standard of living and the quality of life of its citizens, which is where environmental regulation is focused, air quality protection. And the European Commission has the responsibility not only for doing what the European Council and the European Parliament tell it to do in terms of a legislative and policy programme, but in making sure that all of the member states do what they've signed up to do, because the rules are there. Because although everybody likes to think everyone will get on all the time, of course countries will be wanting to do slightly different things, but where we have got a level playing field, it's important that countries don't abuse that. And the Commission's function and the role of the European Court of Justice in either interpreting legislation where there is uncertainty, or in finding that a member state has breached its legal obligations, are there to protect EU citizens as a whole. And the effect of Brexit is to transfer the power that we currently have as European Union citizens to take our government to task without having to litigate, because we can just write to the Commission, who will investigate if there is a complaint that a member state has breached European legislation, and the Commission will progress that. We don't have to be like US citizens and employ lawyers and toxic tort lawyers to redress harm, because the EU seeks, it's not perfect, but the principles of polluter pays, prevention being better than harm, are there to protect the quality of the environment and the health of citizens. So the loss of our ability to challenge our own government on those rights, which we will lose once they are no longer enforced through the Commission and the European Court of Justice, means that Brexit is effectively a big power transfer from UK citizens to our government. And what happens in terms of the future shape of the withdrawal deal or not the withdrawal deal will determine whether those rights reside with the government to the extent that we have any ability to hold them to account, or whether they are given to the free market in the way that and taken away effectively from us, so that business would not have to comply with the obligations that the EU requires member states to ensure businesses trading in their jurisdictions do. And so where businesses say they don't trade with the EU, therefore they don't have to comply with the rules. The rules that they comply with are there to protect the standards of living, to raise standards of living, and to protect the environment generally. Just a few minor things that came up today is, firstly, in terms of the barriers to trade, it's not just to trade, it's about moving musical instruments. With orchestras, they will have to submit customs declarations, seek carnets to carry their instruments. There will be no longer frictionless movement of musicians across the border. Formula One is concerned because the movement of Formula One motor vehicles across a customs barrier into the single market will require a lot of paperwork, which isn't currently necessary. Horse racing, movement of live animals across a border, requires a lot of paperwork. And museums are deeply concerned about the movement of artworks because if we're not in both the customs union and the single market, all of the movement of everything will need to be documented and subject to the regulations. So today we heard, unfortunately, as I said, Robin Walker wasn't able to join us, but we were told that as far as the chemicals and pharmaceutical sector are concerned, which together are the largest manufacturing exports from the UK, it's £50.7 billion worth of exports. 66% of that goes to the European Union, and 75% of our chemicals imports come from the EU, and that's part of this movement of these sophisticated supply chains where we've got products moving seamlessly over borders. In order to function, the UK chemicals industry needs to be in the European Chemical Agency's regime, and one of those, the key one, is called REACH, the Registration, Evaluation and Authorisation of Chemicals, which they don't want to lose. They don't want to have to pay more to register chemicals in the UK. It would be an extra burden of cost to them. Every time they've asked the government what is happening, and I've actually managed to ask 2 chairs of select committees myself, and we've all had the same answer, which is the UK government has asked the European Union if the UK government of the UK can have associate status in the European Chemicals Agency, which is where the UK would have no say in how it's run or how chemicals are registered, but would have the ability for UK businesses to be registered so they could trade with the EU. But as the head of the European Chemicals Industry Association, who's based in Brussels, pointed out when he came to see us today, that's a UK ask. There is no legal provision in the European treaties to enable the European Chemicals Agency to give associate status to any other country, so it will very much be a matter of having to sort out what's legally possible and then trying to balance something off. In the meantime, most UK chemicals companies are assuming there will be a very hard Brexit and are setting up affiliates in the European Union 27 in order to be able to keep as much of their business going as they can after the 29th of March. We had just a few comments made on the withdrawal agreement that was released last night. I spent some time myself looking at it last night for a waste matter that I was dealing with. So first of all, Article 5 requires the EU and the UK to negotiate with each other in good faith. But the point is, the withdrawal agreement is a divorce agreement. It is not a trade agreement. It is not an agreement about our future relationship. It is purely splitting up at the end of the relationship. Under Article 128, the UK will no longer act as a leading authority for registrations of chemicals. Article 7, the UK will lose the right to appoint or elect during the transition period any decision maker or person in any of the EU agencies that we currently participate in and through which much of our trade is regulated. Article 8, data sharing. At the end of the transition period, the UK ceases to have a right to access any database, including the chemicals database that our industry relies on, unless otherwise provided for at the end of transition. And, sorry, I can't see anything here. In terms of emissions trading, which is another area I'm quite heavily involved with, there are huge issues over what happens. Even now, we don't know where what will happen to carbon credits at the end of March. The withdrawal agreement provides that the UK can ask for one extension of the agreement, but it doesn't currently say how long that may be for. And one of the issues that we haven't really played or looked at in the UK is the fact there will be a new European Parliament in May 2018. That limits what MEPs can sign up to now, because they will be held to account very shortly by their own constituents in terms of what they're prepared to give the UK. And it's predicted that the voice of the Green parties in the European Parliament will be stronger after May, but that there will be there will be a greater diversity of parties and less strength. In terms of the future of direction of trade, as far as the European Union is concerned, they are concerned about the US and China, but there's a big focus on Africa and working with African countries for a trade deal. By the end of the century, there will be 10 times more Africans than there are Europeans. And the EU regards it as quite a high priority to get investment into Africa to prevent some of the huge migrations of people that we have seen in recent years, where they've been looking for work, looking for food and safe homes. So that, I think, pretty much brings me to an end of my talk. I was hoping there would be somebody from fishing here, because I have generations of fishing blood in me, but I have no idea how to catch fish. But I have been reading all of the legislation around trade with the EU, if you're in the fishing industry, and asking Cheryl Murray how she's been helping them prepare for catch certificates, having to pay for authorised economic operators to process all of their paperwork before they can send their fish off to the border, getting their prior health certificates from DEFRA, and so on. But I've had no reply to those questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sarah. At the end of that tutorial, I'll be issuing a test to you as you leave on some of the your memory of some of those detailed figures in the tables, if you don't mind. And also we have the pleasure, I should have mentioned it earlier, and I should advertise an event which the Conservative MP for this area is holding in Helston tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock, so a little bit earlier than this evening's meeting. The Godolphin Club, he has a meeting on Brexit. And as I said, I invited him to come this evening, which he declined, and I suggested he might want to reciprocate by inviting me to his meeting. He declined that as well. Don't know why. He said that he didn't want it to be party political, but he should be above party politics, but except that he's arranged it with UKIP. So anyway, if you want to go to that, and I'm looking to Jason and Sarah to suggest some helpful questions which you might like to field tomorrow evening before the evening goes out, if you happen to be going. So anyway, with no further ado, I don't think you have any overhead slides for people, so we can keep the lights up. And well, over to you, a bloke from a pub that I met down the road. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Are we on? We're on. Okay, I see a lot of people filming, so what I'll do is I'll walk around a lot today. Yeah. While I'm talking. I do that anyway, though, so don't worry about me. Thank you, Sarah, for that. But it's all Project Fear, of course. Right? None of it's real. It's all Project Fear. Says the people who are threatening to send us 70 million Turkish Muslims. Say the people that say 29 million Romanian and Bulgarians are coming to live in your basement. Yeah, and they call us Project Fear? Seriously. But before I start, I will talk about international trade and things in a little while. Who remembers last Sunday? Remembrance Sunday, when we remembered the First World War. and the Second World War, and the millions of people that died. Citizens of our country, citizens of our friends and our neighboring countries. How many wars have we had since the EU was founded? The EU, its fundamental principle, the reason for its very creation, is to create peace on our continent. And since it's been around, since we've been working together and talking together, we haven't been fighting with each other. Because in order to trade with somebody, you've got to talk to them instead of pointing a rifle and shooting them. 20 years we've had peace-ish on the island of Ireland, since the Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Agreement was signed. The EU's commitment to that process, as well as the United States contributions, but over the last 20 years, the amount of investment that our friends and neighbours across in Europe have invested on the island of Ireland to stop us killing each other and maiming thousands upon thousands of people on that island just across the Irish Sea is unbelievable. And that's what I want to sort of start with, and keep that in mind while we're talking about trade and all the boring stuff like international trade. Who cares? The economy, who cares? No, yeah, so it's a European Union, it's a trade bloc, it's the biggest one on the planet. So what? How do we think the food gets on our supermarket shelves? How do you think your medicines get into the local chemist? Yeah, when you go to the hospital, how do you think the hospital's got sufficient medicines to treat the patients? Where do the staff come from in the hospitals? The fact that we're a member of the largest single trade bloc on the planet affects all of our lives. Sarah was talking about foreign direct investment. Over £1 trillion of foreign direct investment into the United Kingdom. 40% of that comes from other EU 27 countries. And when we talk about FDI and foreign direct investment, what's that all about? It's about a company from a foreign country investing in the United Kingdom, creating a business, creating jobs, allowing friends and family members and cousins and people around the country to be able to have a job and provide for their families and pay taxes and national insurance into HM Treasury so that Her Majesty's Treasury's got money to spend on the NHS and welfare and benefits and the fire brigade and the police force and the army. This is what foreign direct investment does. It keeps our lights on our streets, because central government can issue some of that taxes that they've collected from these foreign companies that have invested in the UK and put it down to local authorities and local councils. Across the board, being a member of an international community is really, really helpful. So 40% of our FDI, our foreign direct investment, comes from other EU 27 countries. Another 30% comes from the United States of America, as was pointed out by Sarah. And the other third comes from other countries all over the world. When we leave the European Union, we're not just leaving the bloc of 27 countries, our nearest neighbours. We're also leaving a whole host of other international agreements with another 60 plus countries all over the planet. You don't have to have a comprehensive free trade agreement with a country in order to be able to trade. But when you get to a comprehensive free trade agreement, that's like getting married at the end of a long engagement. And before you get engaged, you're going on a few dates. Before you go on a few dates, you might be on the phone a lot. You might have a few. So there's a whole process, and you start with these framework agreements when you start trading with somebody, or saying, I want to be able to buy something from you, I want to be able to sell you something. So it's a long old process before you actually get to a comprehensive free trade agreement. I've just realised Andrew introduced me as the bloke he met in the pub down the road. If you don't know about Three Blokes in the Pub, I'm the middle guy. I'm a former international trade negotiator. I've lived and worked in over a dozen countries inside and outside the European Union. The Hong Kong government flew me out to represent them as an expert witness in an international arbitration case. So I'm the middle guy. The guy in the hat on the left in the pub, in our videos, he's travelled to every single country on the planet without flying. Over 200 countries he's been to without flying. He's crossed a lot of land borders. He knows how easy it is to go around the EU and countries that are working together, and to get into countries where we have no relationship, like Syria and Afghanistan and Iran. He's been around the world, and 54 countries on the African continent. He got imprisoned there twice, actually, but he'll tell you about that another time. The third, and Graham rang me up one day and he said, Jason, we're talking about Brexit all the time online on social media. He said, but nobody's listening, to social media. Nobody listens to the politicians anymore. They listen to Dave down the pub. He tells them what they should vote and how they should vote. He said, why not I get my video camera, I'll come to London, we'll sit and talk about Brexit from my perspective and your perspective, and we'll film it and stick it on YouTube and see what people think. And then as he was coming down, he said, let's get Kieran as well, the third bloke in the pub. He's a just-in-time white van man. He's a delivery driver from Essex. He's driven 1 million miles in Europe. He's crossed every border from Gibraltar to the Arctic Circle and the Ukraine across to the United Kingdom. He goes through Dover and Calais port every single week. He travels a lot. He picks things up in Spain and France and gets them back to the United Kingdom just in time to go onto a production line. That's what just-in-time delivery is. That's what he does. So we sat in a pub and we filmed it, stuck it onto YouTube, and that was episode 1. We talked about what does Brexit mean? And people loved it. With 800,000 views and downloads in 7 days. We were gobsmacked. I've never done anything like that. I'm like a businessman. I'm not a campaigner or an activist. I was like, holy moly, that's a lot of people. We've got to do another one. So then we did another video, and it was the best kind of Brexit. What's the best Brexit that we could possibly have? So we filmed that, and then there was a lot of talk about World Trade Organization rules. We could just leave the EU, we don't need the EU, we could just fall back onto WTO rules and everything would be great. They forgot to tell us that nobody in the world, no country on the planet trades solely under WTO terms, because it's a nightmare. Now I knew this, and I said, look, Graham, why don't we go to Geneva and go to the headquarters of this organization, and we'll sit down for a couple of days and we'll talk to these guys and see what they say in Geneva about falling back onto WTO terms and what it actually means. Now, the World Trade Organization has got 164 country members all over the world. Well, clearly, because it's the World Trade Organization, duh. So we sat with these guys and said, well, what do you think it means? What are other countries saying about Brexit? How are they looking at the United Kingdom? And they said, well, Wilbur Ross is a good example of what other countries are saying. Now, Wilbur Ross is the Secretary of State for Commerce for the United States of America. The second largest trade bloc on the world, if you like. He's called Brexit a God-given opportunity to take pieces out of the UK industrial and manufacturing sectors. God-given opportunity to take pieces out of our economy, and we're doing it on purpose to allow these countries to do this? That's insanity. They likened it to saying, it's almost like you're imposing sanctions, but you're not imposing economic sanctions on Russia or Iran, you're imposing them on yourselves. They gave us 2 anecdotes, or 2 similes, or whatever you want to call it. The first one, they said, what you're doing with Brexit, it's like you're driving down the Autobahn at 140 kilometers an hour, you've got your husband or your wife sitting in the passenger seat, your kids are sitting behind you in the back seat, you're in 6th gear, flying down the motorway, 140 miles an hour, and what you do is you put the clutch in, put the car into 1st gear at 140 miles an hour and let the clutch out. They said, that's what Brexit is, and that's what you're doing to your country. They said, whatever happens, the engine is going to be devastated. And the engine is the economy of your country. It's what provides money for the NHS and for the military and for local authorities. They said, if the passengers in the car, if they survive, they're going to be in deep shock for a long, long time. And that's us. That was the first analogy they gave us. They said the rest of the world who are in and out of this same office every single week, other countries are here every day or every week. We've got one guy from France, another guy from South Korea, another guy from Mexico, another one from Brazil. They're in and out. They all see the European Union as like a bait ball of fish, swimming around really, really fast, protecting each other while they're being surrounded by all these sharks. And the sharks are just waiting. The sharks are the other countries. They're just waiting for a big, fat, juicy fish to swim away from that bait ball by itself so they can swoop in and take pieces out. And then he said, well, the first part of the UK economy that other countries are going to go after, or telling us that they're going to go after, is your agri-food sector. That's your agriculture and downstream food processing. So agriculture is your dairy farmers, yeah, your meat farmers, your crop farmers, your arable farmers. But if you've got a dairy farm, he's not just producing milk. He's also creating like a mini industry down over here making butter. And selling the butter. You've got another industry over here making cheese from the milk that's being produced by the dairy farmer. Another one over here that's making yogurt that's from the milk that's produced by the dairy farmer. And the yogurt guy, he's got his own little industries that he's creating. He's creating another industry making little plastic pots to put the yogurt in. Another little industry that's making the little silver foil tops that go onto those plastic pots. You've got a cardboard paper manufacturer making the wrapping that goes around the pots when they're all put together. You've got a printing company printing the marketing and the advertising on the outside of it, which goes into the thing. You've got logistics companies moving all these different pieces around. They said in the UK you've got 3.5 million people work in the United Kingdom agri-food sector. And they said under every single model that we've run, economic model that we've run on our systems, and bear in mind it's one of the wealthiest organizations on the planet, it's the World Trade Organization, with a withdrawal agreement or without, with a transition agreement out to 2020 without, and all of the different scenarios of Brexit, your agri-food sector in the United Kingdom has a minimum of 18 months life expectancy before it's gone, and a maximum with a soft Brexit of 24 months. I'm like, what? 3.5 million people? How are they going to destroy an industry in 2 years? Now, we as international trade negotiators, we're hard-nosed gits. If I'm representing the United States of America and I want to be able to supply my beef or my chicken or my whatever the products I want to sell to the United Kingdom, the first thing I'm going to do is try and take away the competition. I did it in the steel industry a lot. I used to run strategic market planning for the 5th largest steel company in the world, and we'd look at our competition over there and say, well, okay, what are they doing? What can we do to leapfrog over them and 5, 10, 15-year strategic plan to be well ahead of them by the end of the 15 years? And we'd say, okay, well, let's sell into their market. We'll sell in loss leader products, so we lose a bit of money for a couple of years. And then once we've destroyed the competition in that area, we can then hike up our prices to whatever we want them to be. And we can recoup the losses that we made in the first couple of years over the next 5 or 10 years. And that's what the Brexiteers, specifically the European Research Group in Parliament, led by Jacob Rees-Mogg, are even suggesting that we help these other countries destroy our economy. They're saying, well, let's lower all our tariffs to 0. Then we can have cheap shoes for our children. Then we can have cheap food imported into the country. And so, first of all, we're not going to have any sort of protectionist tariffs. People say the EU's protectionist. Yeah, damn right it is. It's protecting us against these other other countries like the United States of America. So, first of all, the proposal is we lower all our tariffs. Then, basically, you've given away everything. If you're a trade negotiator, I'm sitting in America going, okay, well, why would I do a trade deal with the United Kingdom to lower my tariffs and lower my barriers when they've just made it as simple as possible? They've taken away all the incentive. As a WTO member, any of the other 163 countries around the world, they'll say, yeah, but I'm bound by the WTO rules, so I've still got to charge a tariff on everything I buy from the United Kingdom. So everything we sell, say I make bottled water at the moment, and I sell it to Mexico for £1 a bottle. Easy. When I sell it post-Brexit as a third country to Mexico with no trade agreement with Mexico, my customer's forced to apply an import tariff under WTO rules, which says he now has to pay £1.25 for that same bottle of water he used to pay £1 for. But he can still buy that bottle of water for £1 from any of the other countries where they've got trade agreements. It's only the UK that's giving up all of its trade agreements, not just with the EU 27, but with all of the other countries we trade with, thanks to our EU membership. We lose all of those trade agreements. Every single thing we export out of the country will be subject to import tariffs at the other end. Now, the Brexiteers don't seem to understand the difference between imports and exports, and Sarah made a really good point about it being frictionless with the European Union. It's also much easier with all these other countries. These trade agreements that we enjoy as an EU member, they cover about 90% of all of our exports. Today, we've got about 5.4 million small to medium-sized enterprises in the UK. 5.4 million little businesses, ranging from 10 to 50 employees. 334,000 of those currently ship to the EU. That's their target market. 334,000 companies employing minimum 10 people. 3.3 million people. 3.3 million jobs just shipping stuff to Madrid or Barcelona the same way they can ship to Manchester or Birmingham. Makes no difference. When we put up these frictions and these barriers on our borders, these small businesses will have to hire a freight forwarder, a customs agent, or they'll have to hire somebody themselves and hire another member of staff. How they're going to pay for that, goodness knows. The government's technical notices says that they should buy a piece of software. It doesn't tell them which piece of software or where they can buy it from or what it's going to do for them. But these are companies that have never had to fill in customs declarations. They've never had to fill in carnets and list all the goods that are going to be shipped from this country to France or to Spain or to Slovakia or to another country around the world. They've not had to do it before. Now they will. That's what Brexit means. So a lot of these companies are unable to do it, can't afford external things. Oh, in fact, we haven't even got enough customs agents in the UK to service 334,000 companies. So where do they come from? Where are they going to come from? Oh, I was going to hire them from the EU. Oh no, we just killed freedom of movement. We can't get them from there either. when you look at the overall, I mean, the international trade is really, really complex, but it's what puts food on our supermarket shelves. When you put up barriers, what about perishable food? Things like lettuce and tomatoes that we currently import into the UK. In the UK, we can only grow 50% of the food that we eat as a country, because we live on a tiny island on the northeast edge of the Atlantic Ocean. It's a fact of geology and geography, it's not my fault. But it's a fact, we only grow about 50%. That means we can feed half the country. So like, you can go hungry, yeah, after Brexit, you guys can have food. Or you can have half the food you eat today, and you've got to give the rest to them. That's what Brexit means. Because if lettuce and tomatoes are stuck in Rotterdam, and they can't get across the North Sea to the United Kingdom, we can't get into Harwich or Folkestone, Harwich or Dover, wherever it's coming into, it's gone off. If it has to sit on the border for 3, 4, 5 days, you've got less choice back in the UK. At a push, we can make about 70% of our food. The problem is, we then don't have people to pick it from the fields. If you look at Owen Paterson, right, minister in the coalition government, he said, when he was a minister, he said, well, the thing, if we get rid of all these EU migrants from Romania and Bulgaria who are coming over here, working over here, paying their taxes over here, picking our fruit, picking our vegetables, if we get rid of all of them, what we can do is we can put pensioners to work in the fields. True. You could Google it. Get your Google out and Google it. Owen Paterson, pensioners, fruit picking. Right. His proposal is, but it's okay though, because pensioners, I hate to say it, you're not quite as efficient as these young, enthusiastic workers from the rest of the European Union. So his plan was to not pay the minimum wage to pensioners because you don't work as productively. Like, what? Serious proposal from a government minister. The problem we've got is this year we've got 132,000 fewer EU workers in the United Kingdom. It's 132,000 fewer people paying income tax. Take average salaries, £26,000 a year, say £6,000 or £7,000 in income tax, another few £1,000s in national insurance, then they're going down the shops, they're buying food, they've got VAT on a lot of it, they're buying electronics, they're buying bedding, they're buying clothes. All of that income gone from 132,000 EU migrants that don't want to be here anymore. They've left the country. And at the same time as them going, it means that our food and our vegetables is rotting in farmers' fields. Look at the NFU. I mean, all of this you can Google for yourselves, and I actively encourage people to fact check and Google this sort of thing, these sort of facts, because people just say, oh, it's Project Fear, it's not true. So food's rotting in the fields, we haven't got fruit pickers, there's 108,000 vacancies in the National Health Service across England, not even the UK. 108,000 vacancies. We don't have enough nurses to start with, we don't have enough GPs, we don't have enough doctors. And the government's plan post-Brexit is what we'll do is we'll fast-track nurse training so that they can become a doctor in 2 years instead of 5 years. They didn't put that on the side of a big red bus, did they? That your doctors are going to be less qualified in hospitals. They didn't tell us that. So we haven't got enough nurses right now, but what we're going to do is we're going to take some of the nurses and fast-track them into doctors. And where the heck are the nurses going to come from? Who's going to be putting the medicines into the patients' mouths and bloodstreams? While we're talking about medicines, I had a 3-hour conference call last week with one of the major pharmaceutical manufacturers in the UK. And she's the head of regulatory stuff. So she makes sure medicines are safe for us to consume. They do all the testing of the drugs that they make and make sure that the tablets we take don't kill us. It's quite a useful job. But she's really, really senior. And she's one of the people that goes in and gives evidence to DexEU in these secret consultation meetings. Who knew they had secret consultation meetings at the Department for Exiting the EU? That's why they're secret. Shh. So when they go in to these things, in various industry sectors, not just pharmaceuticals and medicines, they get given a piece of paper on the table and they're told to sign it. And this is a non-disclosure agreement that says anything that they discuss and they hear during that next meeting, they're not allowed to talk about outside of the room. All secret. And I said, what, is this some junior civil servant making up rules just because he can, because he's a job's worth? They said, no. Secretary of State says, sign this before we start the meeting. They sign it, and then they're given to the Secretary of State, who collects them all up and takes them out the room. So she's in the room with GlaxoSmithKline, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca. These are all pharmaceutical medicine manufacturers in the UK. And she was telling us off the record what advice these companies had given to the UK government about Brexit and what happens after we leave. They've warned the government that we need to stockpile about 6 months' worth of medicines. And the government said, we can't afford to stockpile 6 months of medicines for the entire NHS and all our chemists and all our GPs across the country. So the government's proposal is to stockpile 6 weeks' worth. Now, the people that are in the know, who've actually manufactured the 48 million different packages of medicines that we make in the UK, that we ship across to the EU every single year, and so we sell a lot of drugs. We make a lot of drugs and we sell them to the EU, but we also import 37 million packages of tablets and medicines every single year back into the UK to service the UK population. What that tells us is we don't make the medicines that we need to fulfill everything we do. And that's the great thing about working in cooperation with the largest single market on the planet. They can make some things over there that we need, and we can make things they need, and we can just share it backwards and forwards through friction-free borders. And so the problem that she's got particularly is her daughter's really ill. Really ill. So she has medicines, and she knows, she's in the know, she knows that she needs 6 months worth of stockpiling of this particular medicine. And she said the government are not doing it. She went to her NHS GP. NHS GP said, no, sorry, we can't prescribe 6 months ahead. We just can't do it because we're the NHS. So she went to a private general practitioner and got prescriptions for 6 months ahead for this particular medicine that only comes from Italy. And she knows what the problems are going to be trying to get that medicine into the UK post-Brexit. She's bought herself her own freezer, a separate freezer at home, and a brand new fridge. And she's got all the medicine her daughter needs for 6 months post-Brexit. The NHS are not doing that because we cannot afford to do it. And the government are not giving us this information that we need to know. I do a lot of these sort of talks all over the country. A lady sat in one of the talks I did. She said, Jason, can you guarantee me that I'm not going to die because of Brexit? And I said, well, how do you mean? And she said, well, I'm on 6 different types of medication a day. If I miss one, I would be dead in 24 hours due to the nature of my illness. I'm like, holy cow. She said, 3 of the medicines I take, 3 of the 6, have got a 7-day potency, which means if I take them on the 8th or 9th day, it's not potent, and I will die within 24 hours. I'm like, holy shit. She said, how am I supposed to stockpile drugs that have got a 7-day life expectancy? And that was an absolute, genuine question. She can't be the only person in the country that has that kind of issue. We talk a lot about radioactive isotopes, how we're going to get those into the country. These are things that they use for chemotherapy. Right? They've got a 30-minute optimum time of use. They're brought into hospitals on motorcycles while the patient is being prepped to be treated for chemotherapy treatment. And they come into the country just in time. Yeah, and we can do that right now, friction-free. When we put up the barriers that Sarah was talking about, people are going to die because of Brexit. And that's just unacceptable. The Secretary of State for Health was asked the question yesterday morning on the radio, and the presenters asked him and said, can you guarantee that people will not be dying because of Brexit over the medicines issue? And he said, no. He can't guarantee that. The Department of Health wrote to the Department for Exiting the EU and said, medicines is one thing, but we cook food, we balance meals nutritionally for different types of patients in different wards at different ages, from pediatrics right through to through all the different departments in the hospital. He said, if we don't have the right ingredients, we can't cook the right foods. And if we can't cook the right foods, people are not going to go home from the hospitals, despite the fact we could have cured them. This is the Department of Health's official warning to the government. And people were worried that aeroplanes wouldn't be flying. This is so serious, I cannot emphasize it enough. And why won't aeroplanes fly, by the way, just since I mentioned it? Because we have 750 different treaties with the European Union. One of them is called EASA. It's the European Aviation Safety Agency. And their job is to certify British engineers that they're qualified to put fuel into an aeroplane and refuel it when it's landed at a British airport. Yeah? And without that certification, I mean, I couldn't walk onto an airfield and put fuel in an aeroplane because I'm not qualified to do it. I don't have a certificate, I don't have a little badge that says I can. You know, you've got engineers who fix and maintain airplanes, and they're qualified to put the sellotape on the wing when it's about to fall off. You know? And that's their job. They're qualified to do that and certified. When we're no longer an EU member, we lose the ability to certify our engineers to do all these different jobs on the airplanes, which means the entire airplane is no longer certified as safe to fly inside EU airspace. So therefore, we can't fly in. That's just one of the little tiny pieces. When all the treaties cease, he says, just quickly checking the time. Yep. Okay, a few more minutes. When all our treaties cease when we leave the European Union, because that's what Article 50 says. Article 50 is 5 paragraphs, half an A4 page. The third paragraph says all of the treaties cease to apply to the member state that's leaving the European Union. One of those is the EASA and certification of our engineers. Secondly, the Single Skies Agreement. That gives us a username and a login and a password to be able to access EU-wide air traffic control systems. So we can see when aeroplanes are flying into UK airspace and they can see when our planes are going out. That gets cancelled at 11:01 p.m. 29th of March next year. You've got the Open Skies Agreement, which is between the European Union and other international countries around the world. That allows American planes to come and land in EU countries. Those are just 3 of 750 plus different treaties, all of which cease to apply to the United Kingdom. Eurostar train drivers, they're not allowed, they won't be qualified to drive on the continent. So you can drive the Eurostar to Calais, but he's got to get off and put a French driver on to drive it further. Anyway, I've touched on a number of different things, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. Remember why the EU was created in the first place, please. Peace. Because we jaw. Now we talk rather than war. And for me, that's the absolute number one reason why we should stay members of the European Union.
Thank you very much, Jason. Of course, what has been happening this week is that we now know a little bit more about the agreement itself, and you may want to have questions on that. I know that you're probably getting a certain amount of pleasure, as I am, of seeing Brexiteers facing the potential of living themselves in perpetual purgatory, of living in this sort of netherworld between leaving and not quite leaving, and living in the customs union in a way that they can never extricate themselves from. Can we take the gentleman there in the middle first, and Juliet is the yes, just back and the third row of the blue seats there. Thank you very much indeed. Right, okay.
Yeah, hello. I have a question. How can the government make sure to save workplaces workplace in the car industry? Because BMW announced that if there's a no Brexit deal, Brexit without a deal, they would close some car industry points in Britain. And also Land Rover changed the place from Britain into another country. I'm not certain which country it is. It's an European Union country. Thank you.
Excellent question. You're absolutely right. BMW, the new electric Mini, will not be produced in Oxfordshire like the last series of Minis have been. It's being built abroad. Jaguar Land Rover have already announced that their new electric vehicle range will not be built back in the UK. Take Nissan up in Sunderland. 77% of the cars they build in Sunderland are left-hand drive. Guess where they're not sold? Here, they're built in the UK and shipped to the European Union. It's not an export market right now. Due to the barriers that Sarah talked about earlier, that'll increase their cost of production in the UK by about 7%. The tariff on a car going back into the EU that's produced in a third country, which is what we'll be, is another 10% on top of that. So we're increasing the cost of production in the UK by 17% when they can buy that same Nissan Qashqai or that Nissan Juke built in France or Romania or Spain or any of the other Nissan factories 17% cheaper. Why are they going to pay a premium to buy a car that's built in Britain? You've got to ask why people would do that. They just wouldn't. So it's crazy. So yeah, a lot of jobs. And there's 700,000 people work in the UK automotive sector. And if you think 3/4 of the cars that we build are shipped to the European Union, are they all, even if they only cut 25% of the jobs, that's 250,000 people nearly. Gone. Household incomes, gone. How are these people going to put food on their table when Nissan are not producing here and HM Treasury's income has just fallen off a cliff? Treasury have got less money than they used to have already. and you've got more people on benefits who can't work because there's no jobs anymore in their industry. That is the key to bankruptcy and increasing of national debt, and we know what happens when national debt and the deficit increases. We've just had 10 years of austerity, for goodness sakes. You think we've seen austerity? Brexit will bring it a lot worse.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to just raise something which I had given both Sarah and Jason some advance notice of, just because I know this is very much a kind of a strong Remain message, and I'm slightly concerned that we need to try and temper it with the best case that the Brexiteers could possibly make. The one that I'd found most recently, which articulated it in very good summary form, was actually David Davis at the weekend on the Today programme. I just read from the notes. I just wanted to ask for the, I know, brief responses in response to this. So the argument goes from the Brexit line is being in a customs union would bind us into a common rule book, which would take away our right to make our own decisions and would make us a tax collector for the EU, would stop us doing our own deals with the rest of the world where we do 60% of our trade, would not really give us freedom of movement. The EU want to keep us in the customs union because they don't want us to successfully do trade deals with the rest of the world on our own terms. The best deal is a free trade deal. Most of the rest of the world trade successfully with the EU, some more successfully than us, under a free trade rules with the EU. We're a big country. We can look after ourselves perfectly well. Other nations will be falling over themselves to trade with us. You must stop laughing. All sorts of fears have been put up, e.g. there'll be no insulin, no food shortages, all this stuff that Jason's been coming out with, major problems with crossing from Dover to Calais, all of which have been proven to be nonsense. The Northern Ireland border problem is resolvable by sticking to existing tax and customs arrangements and managing any other matters at the ports. If we keep it trade-free, we can retain a frictionless border with Northern Ireland. If there are any problems after we depart the EU, and we're not saying that there won't be, they'll just be hiccups, not lasting problems. Okay.
Oh my goodness, he's such a fantasist, isn't he? If we hadn't made it illegal for the United Kingdom to negotiate new free trade agreements with other countries around the world, fine. The problem is the EU Withdrawal Act that received royal assent in July just this year, section 10.2b, specifically says it will be illegal for any UK government to impose any new checks, measures or controls on the border of the island of Ireland. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that under WTO terms, other countries need to know how much we're exporting out of our borders so that they can apply the right country-specific quotas and the right tariffs to it. We need to be able to measure, check and control the value and the volume of the goods that are coming into our country so we can apply the right tariffs and quotas to protect our UK manufacturing and UK industries. So if we're not measuring, checking and controlling the value and the volume of goods that are crossing our borders by leaving them wide open, which is what David Davis and his cronies are suggesting, then no other country in the world is going to negotiate a trade agreement with us. We're stuck on these WTO rules that we can't get away from. Other countries are bound by them because they've already agreed to them all. We've basically put ourselves over a barrel, and when they vote on these things in the House of Commons, clearly a lot of them haven't got a clue what they're doing because they made it impossible for Liam Fox to negotiate any new trade deals around the world. When he talks about all these new trade deals, look at the Department of International Trade website, the consultations they've got with other countries. They've got 4 in the last 2 years. Liam Fox has been around the world twice, and he's come up with 4 countries or 4 trade deals to consult on. One is the United States of America, who've already opposed our WTO schedules, our proposed schedules. Australia and New Zealand, who've already opposed our schedules that we've proposed to the World Trade Organization, and the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is sort of Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, that trade bloc over there. And they've already said, well, do you know what? We've just signed this really good trade agreement with the European Union, and we want to focus on that for the next 5 years, so come talk to us later. That's it. The sum total of Liam Fox's work in 2 years' time.
Well, hopefully the known of the rules that the UK has to apply on customs and the single market show that if we are to avoid a barrier, if we are to keep frictionless barrier in Ireland, then it is not possible to do so if the United Kingdom leaves the customs union and the single market. And I imagine it was around that time that Theresa May suddenly realised what the single market was and what the customs union was, that she realised that it is not possible for the UK to leave the European Union and trade on WTO terms. It is just a non-starter. This whole suggestion, the hours and weeks and years 18 months, whatever we've had on, it'll be okay to trade on WTO terms. No, it won't, because it will not enable the Irish border to remain open if we revert to WTO rules for the very basic reasons that Jason has set out. The existing international rule order does not permit that to happen. And that is our backstop position. The Irish border really is the starting point of the extent to which the UK can deviate from the rules of the European Union. And the point about WTO rules is that they don't protect the same non-tariff barriers to trade that we have. So we're very keen on animal welfare in the United Kingdom. In fact, Cheryl Murray is also keen on animal welfare and does not seem to understand it's not possible to maintain animal welfare standards if we are to trade solely on WTO terms, because animal welfare is not a protected non-tariff barrier to trade. And there are some very excellent trade experts on Twitter who take great delight in dissecting non-tariff barriers and showing quite how quickly the UK will lose WTO dispute mechanisms, and if we require our own producers to maintain high animal welfare standards whilst being unable to prevent countries such as the United States, who have no animal welfare standards, for example on poultry, to export their far cheaper to produce chicken to our country, and then find our domestic consumer producers can't afford to drop their prices because we have animal welfare standards, then we are really, something's gone horribly wrong. So WTO rules, forget it. We can't do it because of Ireland.
Yeah, I just wonder what's behind some of the, people like Rees-Mogg and Johnson and Farage's motives. And I read an interesting article about disaster capitalism, and I just wondered how much truth you think is in that, whereby they basically want chaos to happen so that, out of all the companies falling down, they can make a lot of money.
Jacob Rees-Mogg's father, a guy called William Rees-Mogg, strangely, Rees-Mogg, he's written a number of books on disaster capitalism. But if you're asking me to suggest what on earth is going on in these crazy people's minds as to why they're trying to push this through, beats me. There's lots of conspiracy theories. It could be something to do with the ATAD agreement, which is the Anti-Tax Avoidance Directive. What that says is if you've got a load of money and you've been hiding it and not paying all the taxes you're supposed to be paying, you've got to open the books, and you've got to be a little bit more open about where you pay tax and how much tax you're paying in various countries. There's all sorts of different conspiracy theories of which one's true and why these crazy people are dragging us, kicking and screaming. And why do they have to lie about it? If Brexit was so good, why so many lies? I can't explain what their motives are. I really can't. I'm sorry.
David Davies is very interesting because 10 years ago he was something of a hero for standing up for individual liberty. And he wrote a really good paper which he delivered in 2009 in the Magna Carta lecture series called The Assault on Liberty. And he spoke then about the dangers of big government interfering in people's lives, having control of too much personal data about individuals. And his focus was very much on protection of individual liberty by preventing governments from getting too powerful. He said some very interesting I think it was in his talk, he said that he looked around Parliament and could see few, if any, geniuses. I thought that probably still true now. More seriously, he also pointed out, he said that the defences of liberty in our unwritten constitution are fragile, if not illusory. And I think it's very ironic that it was under his watch at Dexu that some of the most draconian government power grabs through the Withdrawal Act and other Brexit legislation have taken place. So I can understand there is a view that you shouldn't have big government because it takes power away from individuals, but at the same time, the more people you have in a smaller area, the more controls you have to have in order to get a balance between individual liberties and communities. Margaret Thatcher said there's no such thing as society. That's part of the Robert Mercer viewpoint in the United States, and also that tax is a theft. It really depends where you put your marker in the sand over the importance of society over individuals and individuals within a society. And that's where David Davies started out. But I have to say, I am gravely concerned with what he's been doing.
A little bit of irony. When David Davis was fighting for individual liberties and freedoms, he took the UK government, Conservative government, to the European Court of Justice and won.
Let's assume that they have, Jacob Rees-Mogg and the Brexiteers and so on, have a vested interest on when we'll make money, because, as lovely lady, very good presentation, thank you, it pointed out they will be then writing their own rule book. Obviously they have, as you've been saying, we have to use international rules and so on and so forth, but in this country, for their rules in this country, they get to write the rule book, quite literally, as you were just saying. Won't Jacob Rees-Mogg's children and all of the other Brexiteers, their children live in this world as well? As you pointed out in the first place, Andrew George, that it's the children, and my children and everyone here's children, are going to suffer most because of this. You were saying, what can we actually do? Because quite clearly there's quite a Remain feel here, and I was a Remainer before and I will continue to be a Remainer. But I don't feel like you just come up on social media, on any way you speak about it, against this fear-mongering, whatever you want to call it. You have to appreciate democracy, but when democracy comes from people telling the truth, we were never told the truth in the first place, so that's why we're hoping for another vote to say, can we do it again? How do we get that to happen? Because I've signed 100 petitions and it still doesn't look like it's actually going to happen. Do you think it will? In all honesty, do you think we will get to have another vote?
Is that a question aimed at me? Yeah, well, I'll start. I mean, do I think it's going to happen? I think that the odds on it happening have increased, not actually as a result of campaigning, but I think raising the issue, and not, I think, if you like, bemoaning in the sense of complaining about the fact that, it was the wrong decision and we ought to go back and do it again, purely as a kind of a bleating exercise, but simply to point out first of all the fraud that took place, I think, because there was a significant amount of it, and more of it is actually being uncovered. But that in itself would not, in my view, justify it. When I was in Parliament, we were talking about, indeed, we passed an Act of Parliament. The Liberal Democrats in fact, called for a referendum on our membership of the European Union, which would only be triggered at the point when there was a significant treaty change that was presented to the United Kingdom government, such as the Lisbon Treaty in the past. So we'd already done that, and a number of us at that stage had foreseen this, actually had forewarned and said, well, if you undertake a referendum, number one, you have a referendum, but you also need to have a double lock in that to give people the opportunity need to have a final say once they know what the exit means if in vote. Because we're in the situation now, no one had asked for it. The Conservatives just would simply believe that they could have a referendum that would be done and dusted, and David Cameron would win that referendum, and that would be the end of it. Of course, it didn't work out that way. Indeed, as I and a number of other people had predicted at the time. So, here we are. We're in the situation that we're in. But of course, the Brexiteers are facing perpetual purgatory. They aren't going to vote for it. Remainers aren't going to vote for it. It's not going to get through Parliament. Then they're in this position of extreme chaos. A general election is less likely than opting for a referendum. The fact that Theresa May says there will be no referendum, I remember that she repeated there will be no general election leading up to last year's general elections. So I think the main thing is just to keep out there, keep on the streets, keep the message going, keep campaigning, and making sure that these things are understood. Keep the messages going, because unless the voice is being heard out there, and despite the keyboard warriors coming back with the out means out and Brexit means Brexit and leave means leave and all those intellectual arguments that they come back with, that in spite of all that, just keep bravely going out there and making the case, because it's going to happen, because that is the only method by which this can be resolved.
I should go further than that. It's the only way that the members of the House of Commons can protect their own jobs. And guess what? The current members of Parliament sitting in government but think about the most and care about the most, it's their own jobs. They cannot get this current withdrawal agreement past the House of Commons. There is no majority mandate for this agreement, and there is definitely no mandate to hard cliff edge Brexit. The only option they've got in Parliament is to put the vote back to the people so they can blame it on us. So write to you MPs. The People's Vote campaign are encouraging everybody to do this. Send them an email, fill their inboxes, write to them every week, if not every day. Fill them up. Because members of Parliament, when they've got 600, 700, 800 emails in their inbox, or they've got a postbag full of letters saying, I demand a people's vote on the final deal. I didn't know what I was voting for in 2016, and by the way, nor did you. Because we're only just finding out now. And if we don't know today what Brexit means, how on earth did anybody know what they voted for in 2016? So write to your MPs. Andrew came up with a brilliant idea earlier, because if you write one email to your MP, he can go, yeah, and hide it away. But if you write it publicly, if you're in a group of people, like a group of students, sit down, get your entire class to sign it, that one letter, saying, I demand a people's vote because I didn't get a vote in 2016 because I wasn't quite 18. Or whatever the case is, just demand a people's vote, a final say on that final deal, and then put it on social media and tag him in it. Send it to the local paper, because then he can't hide it. He can't just send you the stock reply, the standard letter that he's been told to send by Theresa May. And I thought that was a brilliant idea, Andrew. So keep it up.
My big fear, I don't know whether this is a genuine thing or whether it's something that we on social media have sort of put ourselves into a state of hysteria over, that because I believe the date of the withdrawal was written into the withdrawal bill, if the House of Commons doesn't have a vote, and if, as Dominic Grieve's amendment, he didn't support it himself when it came to the final vote, there doesn't have to be a meaningful vote in the House of Commons unless the Speaker calls for it. My biggest fear is that we're going to drop out of the EU without anybody having to do anything at all, and the Rees-Moggs and so on get their own way. Now, is that understanding true? Okay, so how do we challenge that?
I've read various scenarios. You will not be surprised that there are quite a lot of lawyers out there looking at how different alternatives and different permutations of events can happen. There is always a mix between law and politics, and the edges can get a little bit greyer in law, where politics makes that possible. In all of the places that I have been, mostly with trade groups and so on, and encounter MPs and MEPs, they all say that no deal is absolutely off the table because it would be so catastrophic, primarily for the United Kingdom, but also for the European Union. And certainly in Brittany now, there's a lot of deep concern amongst the communities, the coastal communities, at the prospect of losing the Plymouth-Roscoff ferry route if the UK leaves the customs union and the single market because of the need for border inspection posts. So there is huge political will to avoid the UK dropping out without a deal. I understand that the EU have been looking at the possibility of unilateral extension to Article 50 period, and behind the scenes, I mean, this is just stuff coming off people who seem to know what they're talking about on Twitter, mainly, which is where I sometimes go when I'm feeling really gloomy, to find people who know what they're talking about and can make me feel happy because I'm looking at rules of law and things like that again. These are unprecedented times. Churchill wrote that united wishes and goodwill cannot overcome brute facts. So when I persist in writing to Cheryl Murray and various other people, I keep saying the brute facts are you can't have frictionless trade if you're outside the customs union, the single market. We know what the rules of trade are. These are all the barriers that will be raised. You know, why on earth are you supporting this? And fishing industry, if they caught every single fish in UK waters and sold it on the open market, that's mainly in the EU, is worth £500 million a year. I'm looking at the chemicals sector with 50 billion pounds of exports, 40-ish billion pounds of which are currently under threat because of Brexit. Whatever happens, I just feel I've had to stick my head above the parapet and in a way that I've never have thought about doing previously, because I just got on and did my job, but because we have MPs who aren't adequately educated. And I think it's interesting that we've had the Iraq inquiry, which looked at collective responsibility and what went wrong in Tony Blair's cabinet at the time of that decision. Generic lessons on government decision making. Theresa May has failed to apply even one of those lessons. There's been no robust challenge to policy, there's been no evidence-based decision making, they haven't had the right expertise, they've closeted themselves with far-right economic commentators, Liam Fox's expert group and so on. All of the basic lessons, not only of Iraq, but also the financial crisis, have just been ignored, and we have just appalling standard of decision making now.
Yep. I think the really important thing to take from the question you've asked is if we sit back and do nothing, we fall over a cliff. Not an option. Yeah, we've got to do something. And the political gamesmanship and brokesmanship that's happening in the House of Commons is this meaningful vote, which may be meaningless. As you say, it depends on the speaker. It's an unamendable motion. So basically, Theresa May will say, this is where we're at. What do you all think? And 650 members of Parliament will say, no, we reject that. And she doesn't have to listen. It's an advisory vote. A bit like the referendum was, in 2016. She doesn't have to take any notice of it. But the point is, nobody in the Conservative Party wants to be responsible for dragging Britain over a cliff. Over the cliff edge, hard no-deal Brexit, catastrophic, where the economy tanks and the European Union withdraw all the money they hold in the UK banking system, for example. Remember the financial crisis, the taxpayer bailout was about £258 billion. 17% of the banking deposits in the UK banking sector that hold our banks up is held by the other EU 27 countries. It's over £1.1 trillion. It's more than 4 times the taxpayer bailout of the banks in the worst recession in peacetime history in the United Kingdom. Why on earth would you leave your money in a third country after they've just been slapping you around the face for 3 years? What if they only took out a quarter of it? We're back to where we were 10 years ago, before austerity even started. So no government wants to drag us out with a no-deal Brexit, because that's just too catastrophic to even think about. The withdrawal agreement that's on the table is not acceptable to the Labour Party, to the DUP, it's not acceptable to the SNP, or Plaid, or the Greens, or the Lib Dems. It's mathematically impossible to pass the current withdrawal agreement. The EU have said, that's your lot, kids. You've talked long enough. There is no more discussion, no more negotiations. It's over. That's your deal. We've bent the rules as far as we possibly can without breaking them to help the UK and help Theresa May get to this point, and it's still unacceptable to Parliament. They have no other option except to put the vote back to the people. And we have to make sure that they know we want it. You know, the poll today, this afternoon, by Sky News, it was a small one, about 1,300 people, had us at 54% Remain. You know, some of the polling that I've seen earlier in the week put us at 66%. You know, over 86% of the Labour Party members, they want a second vote with Remain as an option on the ballot paper. 100% of Labour constituencies in the United Kingdom would now vote Remain. 67 Conservative constituencies in the United Kingdom would now vote Remain. That's enough. The swing last time round was only 685,000 people. 2% of the voting people. Yeah? But don't do nothing. If we do nothing, we're out over the cliff. Do something. Write to your MP. Talk to these guys at People's Vote. Get on the street stands. Get on the street stalls on a Saturday. Talk to people. And just communicate some of the stuff that we've been talking about today. It's a dangerous, dangerous situation, and we've got to do something.
Did you want to come back? Okay, now, in view of time, I'm going to take a series of those remaining questions, and then we'll have a wind-up. So, we have a hand here, a hand there, please, and two behind you. They're all on this side of the I don't know whether it's the...
You all have outlined the massive scale of all the different operators, businesses, infrastructure, civil society, who are going to lose because of the EU. I mean, it seems to me very bizarre, it seemed to me bizarre from the start, that the Conservatives have kind of driven this, and they are supposedly the party of business. But yet you hear some of the very largest businesses in the UK warning of dire consequences, or saying, we're probably going to shift abroad, you know. We're making preparations to move our operation by. But we haven't heard a great chorus of medium to smaller sized British businesses standing up and saying, oh my God, this is going to be terrible, you can't do this. Where have their voices? Why have their voices been, in my opinion, so quiet? Why aren't they screaming blue murder by now? And supplementally, is there a section of the British economy and British business who actually do benefit from Brexit?
Okay.
I mean, who are the people that actually benefit from Brexit?
Okay.
In the Scottish referendum, the 16 and 17-year-olds were allowed to vote on Scottish independence, because after all, this is going to affect the entire rest of their lives. 50 years of work. In my case, it'll be 10 years or 15 years. But so those youngsters should certainly be enfranchised to give their opinion. And secondly, I would hope that we would ensure that all British people are allowed to vote, not just because they may have lived in France or been working in France and for a certain number of years, or in Germany or whatever, but they are all allowed to vote.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think there should be a people's vote, always have. But if it is suggested, if it's even contemplated, then the other side will say, no, we've done it, we've had a referendum. They keep saying it, they keep saying the same thing. If it went to a general election, and if Labour were to stand up, as they've said, all things are on the table, if they were to stand up and say, we'll remain, it would give them a quick entry into power, and it would take away the democracy angle, if you like. It would be a mandate from the people without the other side screaming, democracy, 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 we've had a referendum.
There is one party that is taking that line, by the way. You don't need to find another one, really. Okay, go ahead. So you could just vote for that party, especially here.
I co-run a micro business in Cornwall, which is the backbone, isn't it? It's the bread and butter of Cornwall. And my husband, I run it with my husband. He's just gone to sort the dog out. It's a shame he's not here. One of the answers for us is we're a small company with quite a big turnover, and we service a lot of companies that are big for our area. So they wouldn't be classed as big nationally, but they're big for East Cornwall in particular. I won't name them here. I will afterwards, quietly. But it's because, for us, we've had to be really, really careful. And it's taken us about 18 months to build our courage, really, to stand up and be open about how we feel about Brexit. And that is because our main clients voted leave, and we know they did. So we've had to be really careful, and it wasn't until we weighed up the risks where we thought we're screwed anyway. We're screwed anyway, so we're going to have to speak up. And that's what we're doing. And my husband's being really brave, actually. Shame he's not here. Don't tell him I was nice about him. And he goes out and he speaks to the people on the ground, you know? And it could really affect our business, and he's really brave like that, I think. And I've joined Cornwall for Europe, and I'm a keyboard warrior, and I do as much as I can. So I think a lot of businesses don't do it out of fear.
Thank you very much. Well done. And did I see another? Yes, at the back. I think that's the last question point. Thank you, Nigel.
Yeah, quite simple, I hope. We win the people's vote, then what happens?
Well, I'm going to ask that difficult question to my colleagues here, so thank you very much. Thank you for those questions. Who would like to commence the process of answering that?
Do you mind?
Okay, go on.
Yesterday afternoon, I was in a room full of about 150 people, business people, owners of companies, small, medium, and large, from all over the UK in the entertainment sector. We were talking about how they make movies, how they make television programs, about broadcasting, cross borders. We've got over 300 different TV channels in the UK. Stupid microphone. We've got over 300 TV channels in the United Kingdom. Over 65% of them are broadcast across into France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Ireland, across borders. They won't be able to do that anymore. Say they've got a movie maker, and they've got a film of Tom Cruise leaping off a building in Munich. Right? The country of origin of that clip from the movie is German, because that's where it was made. It's then sent through a pipe. These data files of movies are too big for the cloud because they're too high resolution. So they're piped through physical broadband lines into the United Kingdom to these small businesses, like 5 or 6 post-production people sitting in with supercomputers in Soho in London. Associated with that data file is what's called metadata. And there's things in that metadata like the names of the individuals, the EU citizens, of the cameraman, of the people that held the cameras and cables, and who did the filming, and what they do in London with the post-production is they adjust the lights and the shadows. As a non-EU member, under the GDPR, the General Data Protection Rules, the new legislation that's come in, as a third country, we're not entitled to own that data or hold that data in a UK electronic system. This will destroy the post-production sector in the United Kingdom, in London specifically. But all of these people in this room had not a clue. And we said, well, we asked for a show of hands. How many of you have done anything to prepare for Brexit or any research? Not a single hand went up in the room. 140, maybe 150 people in the room. Not a single one of them. We said, well, why have you done no preparation? Well, the government have been telling us that it's all going to be fine because we're going to do a really good deal. And that's why these businesses haven't done their own research. We said, how many of you have heard of the government technical notices or what they're telling you to do in the event of a no-deal Brexit? Yeah, but they all begin, it's okay because we're not going for a no deal, we're going to get a good deal. All of them. I said, have you read the EU preparedness notices? They're like, The EU preparedness notices. I'm like, yeah, get your Google out. Google EU preparedness notice. It'll tell you exactly what's happening with e-commerce, e-signatures, broadcasting, copyrights, anything to do with the audiovisual sector in the UK. You need to be reading this, and you need to be reading it about a year and a half ago. And one of the reasons, to answer your question, is businesses are not shouting out because they don't understand. And one of the things they told us in Geneva is chambers of commerce and businesses in the UK, they need to be raising their voices now. So that was the first thing. Totally agree, 16 to 18-year-olds should be franchised. My daughter was 19 in 2016 during the referendum, and she was refused to vote. She can vote for the London mayor, and she can vote for local councillors. But she's one of those dirty foreign immigrants, because she happened to be born in the Slovak Republic while I was exercising my right to live, love, and work anywhere I wanted to. She's a Slovak citizen. So her employers told her, about a year and a half ago, that she has to get a British passport by this Christmas, otherwise they will find a reason to sack her. Right? Because they're afraid that if we have a no-deal Brexit, EU citizens living and working in the UK will lose their right to live and work in the UK if we have no deal. That's what no deal means. It means these people, if I'm an employer and I'm employing illegal citizens, illegal workers, I'm liable for a fine of up to £10,000. And this is a national company in the high street chain, and they're worried about all the EU citizens, and they've told them all to get an EU passport. So my daughter went to the Home Office, and we applied for British citizenship, because I'm dad, I'm British, born and bred. They said, no, you can't do that, because she was born in the few years of a window of non-opportunity where a British father can't pass on his British citizenship to his daughter. We battled with them for a year and a half just to get her British citizenship. Then we said, now can she have a British passport, please? And they said, no, because she's still got a Slovak passport and she can't have two at the same time, which she can because we've got a bilateral agreement with Slovakia that says she can have dual citizenship. So the Home Office then told us that we had to go to the Slovak embassy and cancel her Slovak citizenship before they'd issue the British passport. The Slovak embassy said, okay, we can do that, but fill in this other form to reapply for your citizenship after you get your British passport. The hostile environment at the Home Office is horrendous. But question for you is, would you rather have a referendum on the same terms with the same franchise as before, without British citizens abroad and without EU citizens being able to vote and without 16 to 18-year-olds being able to vote, or would you rather have no vote at all on the final say? Because if that's the choice, let's have it as before. Let's fight and let's demand 16-year-olds get a vote, and 18-year-olds, and EU citizens who are living and working here get a vote, and British citizens in Spain and France and Germany and the rest of the world. Let's ask for that. But if that's the deal breaker, I'd rather have the vote than not. Labour Party, the question up here. Oh man, that doesn't matter what day of the week it is. You can ask them 5 different things and they'll tell you 5 different stories. You can talk to Barry Gardner, the Shadow Secretary of State for International Trade. He'll tell you one thing about trade. Keir Starmer will tell you something else. We're going to have a referendum. We're going to have Remain as an option. It's going to fail our 6 tests. You can talk to John McDonnell or Jeremy Corbyn. You can talk to 5 Labour front benches. They'll give you 5 different stories. They're telling you, they'll tell you anything you want to hear just to get your vote. I tell you, that was close. I try really hard not to swear, but I've come so close so many times. What happens when we win the referendum? We have to battle at the same time as fighting the campaign. The first fight is to get the vote. Once we've been given the opportunity to vote on the final deal, when we're campaigning, we have to start unifying the country and bringing the Leavers on side and telling them that it's not their fault they voted Leave. Because they were lied to by people who were supposed to be looked up to. These are our elected representatives in the mother of all parliaments in the world. And they're running around on television day by day in the campaign, lying to people. The leaders of the Leave EU campaign, they sat in a parliamentary select committee and said, yes, we deliberately lied to people to get them to vote Leave. There's money coming from all over the place. They were lied to. It's not their fault, but they should be angry, but they should not be sorry that they voted Leave. They should be angry with the people that lied to them.
Thank you, Sarah.
Well, on the SME point, Jason's absolutely right. I don't think many SMEs have a clue what the impact of leaving the European Union is going to be on them. That graph the Freight Transport Association have pulled together, they've been struggling to get Chris Grayling to understand what the barriers to trade will be. And we've suddenly got this huge car park opening up on our motorways in the southeast of England. we have a typed question here, which strikes home a bit. It says, perhaps less than 20 years from now, we can look forward to the UK being in the same league as countries like Indonesia, Mexico, Saudi Arabia and Argentina, rather than acting as an effective counterweight in the European sphere to France and Germany. The Port of Rotterdam say that when the UK is a third country, doing trade with the UK for them and the EU 27 will be doing trade with Morocco. So that is the reality of being a third country. So I thought it was a very useful question. Hopefully I'd picked up on the others about you can't have frictionless trade if you're outside either the customs union or the single market. We need both to have frictionless trade. And for Cornish businesses, adding the friction of having to pay to submit a customs form for each consignment, having to pay to appoint an authorised economic operator, which is the government's trade approach. These are the trusted traders who will process all the paperwork before you get to the border. So when you get to the border, you can just scan your customs form. But it takes around 18 months to get authorised economic operator status. Cost a lot of money. It's like getting ISO 14001. And you need to have been trading with the rest of the world for at least 3 years before you can apply. So that immediately means that is a huge barrier. There are huge barriers. We don't have enough fish inspectors. We don't have enough vets. It's just extraordinary that we have adults actually entertaining absolutely ridiculous suggestions that have no hope of delivery because they have no relationship with reality. And if I hear anybody say that we are taking back control of our borders, our laws and our money, I cannot respect anybody who says those because they have no basis in reality. And as Professor Michael Dugan at Liverpool University said in his excellent pre-EU referendum talk, listening as somebody who understands how the EU work to the Vote Leave and the Leave EU campaign messages is like being an evolutionary biologist listening to a bunch of creationists discuss how the world was formed. It is.
I don't think Sarah quite realises how apt that is, but anyway, carry on.
Well, it is. Well, yes, maybe. But the scale of the difference between reality and the campaign messages, and even some of our own MPs are still chuntering out absolute nonsense. And so the truth has to come out.
Thank you very much for that. Part of me wants the extreme Brexiteers to actually live in the world that they have lovingly designed for the rest of us, until the nice Liberal Democrat in me comes out and I realise that means that tens of millions of other people have to suffer it along with them. But I wish they could just suffer it on their own. But that isn't likely to happen. Now, I wanted to just introduce Charles. Are you going to speak? No, Emmanuel Brooke. We covered the issue of Europeans being able to vote and UK citizens in Europe being able to vote. And Emmanuel Brooke just wanted to say a few words about the In Limbo campaign. Here we are.
Hello, good evening, and thank you for being here. It's been a very interesting evening, and I'm very sorry, I'm not a public speaker. My audience is usually about 7-year-old children. But if you want to move a little bit before you... I'll be a few minutes, but I do think it's very important to talk about what I'm going to talk about. So, my name is Emmanuel Brooke, and I came here tonight with several hats on. I'm the acting chair of Cornwall for Europe, but I'm also an EU citizen, and I chose my home some 23 years ago. In that capacity, I have become an advocate for the In Limbo project, and I would like to share some of my experience with you tonight. 23rd of June 2016, my entire life suffered an earthquake, so big I've ended up on a tiny raft in a sea of questions. Not only questions, I also got
nasty realizations and a life of anxiety. Despite putting all my strength into surviving, I'm still lost. I came to the UK to finish my studies in '96, and I settled after graduation. I found a job in cancer research, got myself onto the property ladder, later married a lovely British man, and we have two children today. I changed my career to early years education to accommodate looking after my children, and now I'm working in a primary school. I am what you would call an ordinary citizen, having lived and contributed here all my adult life. And even if I bring something a little bit different, I've always felt at home in this country. After the referendum, I felt cheated. Overnight, in the eyes of the law, I had become different from my husband and my children, and it terrified me. Sorry. I wasn't scared of deportation or losing my job. I knew I was a strong, empowered individual, and I knew I could fight. I also know there's plenty of caves in Cornwall I could hide in. But at the end of the day, my life choices and my long-term plans were no longer in my own hands. I knew that without the EU framework, I was at the mercy of some government policy maker. Their decision was no longer within my control. I heard "you'll be fine, it's not about you, it'll be okay in the end." But frankly, after 28 months, we've not seen anything on EU citizens' rights yet. I'm not overreacting, I know that. I don't have time to go into the details tonight, but there are plenty of cases of discrimination already, and we haven't left yet. Personally, I'm one of the lucky ones. I became a British citizen earlier this year. Just so you know, in doing so, and Brexit goes ahead, I have given up my rights to look after my French parents in my home here. I had to choose between my children and my parents, and I still haven't had to tell them, the courage to tell them, sorry. But let's focus on the positives. I am in fact very proud to say that I am now a naturalized Cornish citizen. My ceremony in Truro saw me welcome into the land of Cornwall, and in both English and Cornish. Although this creates massive waves when I say this to some people, this is my own identity, and I wear it with pride. My granddad is a Breton, or was Breton, and I feel at home here on so many levels. I will not go into details of that citizenship journey tonight, but if you have ever heard of Theresa May's hostile environment, believe me, it's a lot worse than what you think. One thing I would say, though, is that I was lucky. The only small reason why I got through it with a positive outcome was that I had 5 consecutive P60s. That's all. I know many, many people who have very similar lives to my own, who have much better jobs, do greater things, but they cannot get that residency card for one reason or another. People who had career breaks, parents of young children, carers for disabled or aging family members, people who have fallen into any illnesses, you name it. Millions of people have been caught out in this loophole, and for them the uncertainty continues. This is my testimony, and I will be happy to discuss any aspect later. But what I insist on is that if you know any EU citizens here, or Brits in the EU, maybe a family member, a work colleague, a neighbour, please ask them how they are. Listen to their stories, their worry, their feelings. I can assure you it will help. At the start of my nightmare journey with the Home Office, I came across our Brexit testimonies group. I heard them speak at marches, and I cried my heart out. I realized I was not alone, and because the British public was mostly unaware, their work was doing just that, raising awareness. The In Limbo project has now seen, amongst other things, the publication of 2 books, a collection of 300 testimonies from real people, just a small sample of the 5 million people in limbo on both sides of the channel. The In Limbo project is a not-for-profit initiative. It's entirely funded by donations and by selling the books. The money they raise, and they have raised to date, has enabled the team to present the books to over 1,000 politicians, both in the UK and many of whom had little understanding of the situation we face under the Brexit this government is delivering. The focus of the project is the human side of Brexit, what it means to be European. Both groups of people have been put against each other because the UK citizens in the EU know that we are becoming bargaining chips to secure their rights. But despite that, we stand together, okay? We are each other's twins and images. We are flip sides of the same coin, and we stand together in solidarity. I will stop here, but just to say I'm not a politician, and I know very little about economy and trade. I'm a people's person, and let me tell you this. Brexit is not just a political event or nightmare. It's a human tragedy, and it has already affected a huge number of people on a personal level, and we need to stand in solidarity with each other. We are all Europeans. Tonight, I urge you to take a leaflet home. I've got leaflets. Buy the books. Like me, pass them on to friends and family, because perhaps, just perhaps, if we touch the hearts, we will be stronger to stop this nightmare. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. And I hope you all get a copy of the book.
I came along tonight expecting something different. I thought it might have the feel more of a rally. In fact, it was all about education as far as I was concerned. I learnt an awful lot. And you know what? When we get into the People's Vote campaign, we're going to have to know a lot and persuade every single person we possibly can. And it's folks like you who will be able to back us up and give us the information we need for that campaign. There are a few people here tonight that, like me, are long in the tooth politically. I first went knocking on doors and sticking leaflets into people's hands in February 1974, the miners' strike. And I've been involved in pretty well every political campaign and election since then. And I do have to say to you, I have never experienced in my political life such a feeling of drama, chaos, and anticipation and uncertainty. It's quite remarkable what's going on at the moment. Never known anything like it. And I tell you this, one good thing comes out of this chaos. It means that up and down the country, there are meetings like this, night after night, and we are politicising people through this campaign, and it's meaning that people like Emmanuel, and people like Jane and her business, people who never thought they'd be political or do anything and stand up in public, they've been politicised, and that's actually really good. Because it does seem to me that we're near the breakup of our political system. So Cornwall for Europe does street stalls, not every Saturday. You mentioned doing it on Saturday. We do it pretty well every day of the week. And we organise meetings. And we pay for coaches to take people up to London. And we have leaflets, and we design T-shirts, and we do everything we possibly can to get a people's vote. But more than that, we've got to lay the foundations to win the people's vote. He's been prominent as a former MP and somebody who wants to hold meetings and get people involved, and that's really great. Whatever anybody thinks about your politics and what you've done in the past politically, and it's overwhelmingly favourable, I do have to say, people admire you for wanting to get folks involved. So please do contribute on your way out. Thank you very much for a great evening.
It's been great having such excellent speakers. Professor Michael Dugan was mentioned earlier, and thank you to Joe over there. I'm in touch with him to come down to the area and to be one of our future speakers. And I think a lot of you will have heard his fantastic analyses of the Brexit process as well, and we'll be forwarding to you details of that as soon as that's available. I just one final thought, really, as you go and dig deep in your pockets to support the campaign, if you will, is that this week it has been a momentous week, and I have to say I really enjoyed. I think it was an interview a couple of nights ago with one of the Johnson family, I think it was, one that was a former foreign secretary, who and I'm quoting here, who was frothing at the mouth by saying, having heard about this draft withdrawal agreement, this is the first time in 1,000 years Parliament will not have a say in laws which govern this country. And yet, wasn't he arguing about surrendering sovereignty, which he insisted that we never had during the campaign 2 years previously? I think the contradiction it wasn't even obvious to him when he announced it at the time. And this is, I think, is what we have to fight as we go forward. So look, thank you very much. Thank you to Emmanuel and to Charles for your support this evening. To everyone who's come, there will be more of this. We have to keep this campaign going. We can see we've looked over the edge of the cliff. It doesn't look very nice out there, so we've got to try and stop ourselves falling off it. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.